Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Sunday, July 9th, 2023, and today we are going to be talking about the 2024 presidential election and why Democrats, for the most part, should be quite confident going into this upcoming presidential election year. Now, I'll preface this video by saying there is absolutely a chance the GOP does win the next presidential election, especially depending on who the nominee is. However, at this point in time, as national polls indicate, as endorsements indicate, as fundraising numbers indicate, as everything indicates, Donald Trump is on track to be the next nominee for the 2024 election for the third time in a row. President Trump jumps in with a 52% lead here, at least advantage, with over half of the Republican Party currently choosing him as their top contender for the GOP nomination, a huge shift in favor of the Democratic Party, largely because Donald Trump in the last election, as we know, lost to President Joe Biden. Now, many Democrats are hoping for a rematch, as it seems so are many Republicans. But that's honestly good news from the standard point of looking at it from an analytical sense. We are looking at this objectively, and quite frankly, the numbers don't look good for the GOP. Allow me to explain. Our 2024 map is slightly different than the 2020 presidential electoral map. The reason being that redistricting happened, new census apportionments, and new electoral votes across many different states across the union. States such as Texas and Florida jumped up in electoral count, whereas states such as Michigan and New York decreased in electoral count. Overall, the net positive has been in favor of the GOP, but only negligibly. There shouldn't be much of a change between the two races. Now, what I'm going to show you is a map of all of the same states from 2008 that have voted in the same way in favor of the Democratic Party, roughly equaling out to 231 electoral votes. For reference, Hillary Clinton in 2016 received 232. That leaves the Democrats within just 40 electoral votes, within winning 270 needed to win re-election. In this case, for all purposes, we can assume is President Joe Biden. Now, what I've also added in is this second declaration, this second characterization color of a darker blue. It's a little bit hard on the eyes, so I'm going to change the rating here, and you'll see what I mean in just a moment. But it includes all the states that have voted the same way since 2008. 2008 I'm using as a point of reference because we skip over 2016 in this characterization, which pretty much only includes the states of Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. These are the states that have voted in favor of the Democratic Party, the blue wall that cracked down when Donald Trump ran in 2016, that seems to be on track for a return. At this point in time, this would give the Democratic Party 275 electoral votes at the baseline. Now, what 2016 showed us was that no, you cannot count on it, but what we have seen in recent elections actually proves to the contrary. You see, Donald Trump in 2016 definitely made electoral history. By winning in the blue wall, he did what exactly the Clinton campaign thought was impossible, and was to win the election. Donald Trump had such bad math when it came down to his electoral possibilities in 2016. When you look at the electoral map from 2016, quite frankly, Donald Trump could have won every single swing state with the exception of Nevada and New Hampshire, and the rest of the states pretty much, as we now know based off current margins, are pretty solid in favor of the Democratic Party. But beyond those two states, which the Republican Party was heavily investing in, Donald Trump was on track to lose had he not been able to crack the blue wall. And even then, he could have afforded to win New Hampshire, or Hillary Clinton could have afforded to lose New Hampshire or Nevada in that circumstance. Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania have voted the same way for 24 years until the 2016 presidential election, and all three of them have always voted in unison. It was in 2020 when it returned back to the Democratic Party that Democrats became quite hopeful. Well, really, it was 2018. You see, in 2018, the Democratic Party did phenomenally in the 2018 midterm elections in these three states in particular. In the governor elections, they flipped numerous ones, and then on the on the Senate level, you saw them do extremely well. Now, the governor map I'll show you first because it does tell you an interesting story about this trend that we have seen continued in the Rust Belt over the past couple of years. Wisconsin flipped in favor of Tony Evers. He defeated three-term incumbent Scott Walker. In Michigan, Bill Schuette lost to Gretchen Whitmer by a margin of roughly 10 points across the state. Then in Pennsylvania, Tom Wolf defeated Scott Wagner in this race. Tom Wolf, a very popular incumbent, but Michigan and Wisconsin were flips in favor of the Democratic Party. Then on the Senate level, they won in Pennsylvania by 13 points, won in Michigan by 7, won in Wisconsin by 10, and it told the Democrats, although Donald Trump did well here in 2016, they have a fighting shot in 2020. Not only a fighting shot, but a damn good one that allowed them to go into the next presidential election and flip Wisconsin, flip Michigan, and flip Pennsylvania. But the 2022 midterms were what really solidified my belief that these three states are going to come back in favor of the Democratic Party and allow them to feel confident going into the next election. Because there are many states outside of the ones I've already characterized that Democrats also have a fighting shot in. But we'll get to that near the end of the video. Looking at the 2022 midterm election results, let's take a look at these three states in particular. For a reference point, the nation was about 11 points to the right of where it was in 2018 based off the national popular vote. For reference, in 2018, Democrats won by 8 points. In 2022, Republicans won by 3. A 10 to 11 point shift nationwide, and yet these three states stayed the same. In Wisconsin, Tony Evers defeated Tim Michels, the GOP nominee, by an even larger margin. Even in polling, Tony Evers was set to lose. In Michigan, Gretchen Whitmer did better than she did in 2018, as did Tony Evers. Fascinating result against a propped-up Donald Trump-style candidate, Tudor Dixon. Against Gretchen Whitmer, this margin went from what was 10 points in 2018 to 11. And then came Pennsylvania, a swing state with an open seat here. Josh Shapiro, the attorney general, defeated Doug Mastriano by roughly the same margin that Tom Wolf defeated Scott Wagner. The major difference, Tom Wolf was the incumbent, 11 points to the left of the nation in terms of national popular vote, and yet Pennsylvania, the battleground state that Joe Biden won by just a point, went overwhelmingly in favor of the Democrats. But the Senate elections yet again reaffirmed my belief. While Wisconsin went to Ron Johnson, it was a lot narrower than expected. Ron Johnson was on track to have a victory point of 5 to 6 points statewide, as he did in many elections prior to, or at least in 2010, and then in 2016, ended up winning by about 4 points when he was supposed to lose. Ultimately, the polls overestimated Ron Johnson's support, and he only won by a point. But what really came to be as this solidifying one, at least for Pennsylvania, was John Fetterman's defeat over Dr. Oz. The polls right before the election indicated a GOP victory by 2. We expected them to underestimate the GOP as they had in years past, and yet ultimately the Democrats not only outperformed, but flipped a seat from red to blue in supposedly a red wave year. It was a lot of these factors that have played into my understanding of the current state of the race. You see here, with all of the states that you've characterized, but the three in particular we're making an emphasis on, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, Democrats hold 7 out of the 8 Senate seats across these states. Now, looking at that as well, also including the state of Minnesota, but Minnesota I include just simply on the basis that we talk about it, we realize that it is a Democratic, pretty strong state, but it didn't flip in 2016. These three states in particular are a little bit more interesting because they did flip in 2016, but Minnesota can be lumped in there because, generally speaking, it's a similar wave of voters that you're trying to appeal to. But let's go ahead and shift to just talk about the three states. So 5 out of the 6 senators here are Democrat. Right? You took a look at that portion of the congressional delegation. When you take a look at the presidential results, states that went to Joe Biden in 2020, all states with Democratic governors, all states with Democratic Supreme Courts. I mean, these 3 states have made major advancements in favor of the Democratic Party as of 2016 and recently. Right? Donald Trump's victory here is starting to look more and more like a fluke rather than a consistent trend that the GOP was hoping would unveil itself in the 2022 midterm elections, but it doesn't look like it exists to the extent that they thought. And now looking at the 2024 map again, I am not here to try to propagate any type of narrative that Democrats are guaranteed a re-election point. I'm not naive enough to do that. I think looking at our map here, it just makes sense that Democrats do in fact have a very good shot at winning re-election. Have a very, very good shot. Because given the states that haven't changed since 2008, Democrats are at a baseline where Hillary Clinton was at 231. And we spent a lot of time talking about the blue wall because the blue wall reemergence only allows Democrats an extended opportunity at doing better than they did in 2020. What I mean by that is we can count on Democrats to do well in these 3 states, enough to win, which would prop them up to 275. You throw in Nebraska's 2nd district, as they are expected to win, and then you add in Georgia and Arizona, which brings Joe Biden to 303. But now that there's a possibility that North Carolina might flip, some people are saying Texas. I'm not going to characterize it as such, but still, some people are, making the argument. I think it's possible in the next 10 years, but not in the immediate. But looking at these 3 states, you have the opportunity to win more. But it isn't just the opportunity to win more. Let's go ahead and take away North Carolina. That went to Trump. Let's keep our 2020 map here and talk about why this blue wall significance is so important. So what happens if all of a sudden Donald Trump has a really good night, but not so much in the southern region, but is able to win Wisconsin? The firewall's still here. The solidification of Michigan and Pennsylvania with Georgia and Arizona, states that also Democrats won in 2020, 2022 in governor and Senate. Besides Georgia governor race, but that's a whole another point because that's not having to do with Donald Trump's influence. But looking at this race, looking at our map here, Republicans feasibly could win Wisconsin in 2024, but still lose the election. They could lose, they could win Pennsylvania and still lose the election. Even in this circumstance, and a crazy one, they could win New Hampshire and still lose the election. The reason being that this 3-part blue wall gives Democrats a significant opportunity at maintaining the White House, based on the fact that Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin are reliable states right now, as of today, based off who the nominees are expected to be. I think Donald Trump can still win them, but I think he's the least likely to win them out of all of the GOP contenders. Combined with the fact that Arizona and Georgia, I would throw in there too, that are states that typically reward traditional conservatives, non-Trumpian conservatives like Brian Kemp in 2022. I mean, that's a perfect example of that. They reward the traditional style conservative, but punish the Trumpian ones. And that's the problem for the 2024 election for the GOP, is that Donald Trump is going to be the nominee for the 3rd time in a row after a series of consistent losses. Democrats have rebuilt the blue wall based on one notion and one notion alone: that Donald Trump's influence in this race is big enough that voters have him as someone to vote against. 2018, with an unpopular Republican president, Democrats had a blue wave. In 2020, they expressed that disapproval by voting against him on the presidential margin. And then in 2022, with his endorsement for Mastriano in Pennsylvania that propelled him to the nomination, Tim Michels in Wisconsin that propelled him to the nomination, to Tudor Dixon in Michigan that propelled her to the nomination, to the Senate race in Pennsylvania that propelled Mehmet Oz to the nomination. Voters knew who put up these candidates, and they pushed against them hard. These voters here, we were working under an environment where President Biden was down 10 points nationwide. Republicans won nationally by 3 points when no Republican has won the popular vote since 2004. What we were working with was significantly better for the GOP than any of the past 3 elections. And not only did they blow it, I mean, this was just an insane meltdown of what was expected versus what happened. The House had less than 10 net seats flipped. In 2010, Republicans, for context, picked up 63 seats. It's incomprehensible in hindsight at how the GOP was able to mess this up, but there was one common denominator that I think was a huge factor, and he's back again in 2024. So when we look at this map, I'm not here to wish cast. I'm not here to say, Democrats have this 100% chance of victory, because that's not true. But I'm telling you, it's about 80% right now. It's 80% because that's where we are as a nation. A nation that might disapprove of both candidates, but very clearly prefers one, because they've already voted for one. And I understand there are going to be voters that voted for Biden in 20 that are voting for Trump now. But there are definitely a lot of voters that maybe didn't vote in 20 that might have voted for Trump that are now voting for Biden. Things can change. I think that, based off of what we've seen so far, I don't expect them to change too much. The thing about Joe Biden is that he's a tried and tested candidate. So is Donald Trump. But I don't think Joe Biden puts himself in difficult positions the way that Donald Trump does. What I mean by that is, with Donald Trump running in 2016, that was the first time he was ever vetted for a presidential bid seriously, which meant that all of those things that unveiled the voters cared about or didn't care about, voted against. Then throughout his presidency, he got in a lot of trouble, right? He got into a lot of situations where voters were very unhappy with him, and they pushed back against that in the midterms, which was an early sign. Joe Biden didn't have that. And then in 2020, they pushed back against him tenfold. Then came the insurrection. You forget that happened after the election? Maybe, maybe not. I did for a brief period of time. Then I realized that's a new thing people have to vote on. This 2 new indictments, the arraignment of a former president for the first time in United States history, a criminal trial that will be occurring during the primary process for the first time in United States history with a frontrunner on the GOP side. There's a lot that Republicans now have to deal with in terms of damage that Donald Trump has done to the GOP and his own character. Joe Biden, on the other hand, ran in 88, ran in 2008, became VP for 8 years, ran for president in 2020. All of this vetting, all of this opposition research, all of these attacks, and none of them landed enough to lose him the presidency. Then looking at 2024, yes, you have baggage from the White House, but reasonably speaking, did Afghanistan matter more than abortion to voters in 2022? Exit polling didn't indicate that. Did other things matter more to voters? Did the economy matter more? Sure. But did it mean that they voted against Joe Biden? No. Right? There were people out there that said, I care more about the economy than issues like abortion and gay marriage and whatever it might be, but still voted blue. Because, quite frankly, Joe Biden and the Democratic Party have done a very good job at turning these elections into elections about social issues rather than economic ones. And that's the best thing the Democratic Party can do, and it's exactly what they're doing for 2024. and I 100% expect it to work. Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, what they have shown us over the past 3 years, 4 years, 5 years now, actually, crazy to think about, 2018 through 2023, they have shown us that the Democratic Party stands within a reasonable shot at victory in these states in 2024, more so than they did even in 2020. Based on this rematch hypothetical, Joe Biden and Donald Trump one-on-one does not give the GOP the fighting chance that they really thought they were going to have. They absolutely have it with other candidates, with Tim Scott, with Nikki Haley, even with Vice President Mike Pence. There are reasons to believe other GOP candidates could defeat Joe Biden. But as it stands today, although I might have thought differently a year and a half ago, I no longer believe that Donald Trump would defeat Joe Biden in a rematch election, and I do believe that Democrats, while not overly optimistic, should go into 2024 confident about their abilities, about where they stand in current states, and how they will perform in this hypothetical rematch, which is looking more and more likely by the day. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2024 presidential election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.